It was the kind of morning where the world felt like it was holding its breath. Fog draped heavily over the abandoned neighborhood like a ghost refusing to leave, swallowing sunlight and sound in equal measure. The houses here were skeletons of lives once lived, their windows shattered like broken promises, their roofs sagging with the weight of neglect. Ivy curled like fingers around rusting fences, and the pavement was cracked with weeds tall enough to brush your knees. Amidst this forgotten landscape, something stirred behind one of the more derelict houses at the very end of the cul-de-sac, a structure so consumed by time and rot that even birds avoided its roof. Behind this crumbling shell of a home, in a fenced-off area where the grass had long since died and the ground had turned to a hard, cracked earth, a figure huddled in the shadows. A small, trembling puppy, no older than a few months, its fur matted with dirt and grime, its ribs visible beneath taut, patchy skin. A rusted chain was wrapped around its neck, far too tight for comfort, and tethered to a metal post buried deep in the ground. The chain was short, just long enough for the puppy to lie down, barely enough to turn. The bowl next to him was empty, overturned, long forgotten like everything else here. His eyes, large and too sorrowful for his tiny face, held none of the curious sparkle a puppy should have. Instead, they looked hollow, as if hope had already been drained from him, before he even had a chance to know what it meant. He didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He didn't even lift his head when a truck pulled onto the overgrown gravel path leading to the abandoned house. He had learned that noise never brought kindness. It brought shouts. It brought hunger. It brought nights so cold his body trembled for hours, anchored to that post like a prisoner serving a sentence no one had explained. And so, when the doors of the truck opened and two volunteers from a small-town animal rescue stepped out, Dana and Marcus, armed with clipboards, gloves, and hearts far too big for the world they worked in, the puppy remained still. Dana squinted at the crumpled map and paperwork in her hand. "This is it," she murmured. Anonymous tip said there was a dog behind the property. Marcus sighed. He'd seen too many of these places, the ones where animals were dumped like trash when owners lost interest when life got hard or when no one wanted to take responsibility anymore. They rounded the back of the house, crunching through broken glass and debris until they saw him. The moment Dana laid eyes on the puppy, she stopped breathing. It was like staring at the embodiment of suffering, so small, so defenseless, so unbearably alone. She dropped to her knees without thinking, her eyes already brimming with tears. "Oh my God," she whispered, voice trembling. Marcus stood frozen beside her for a moment before quietly stepping forward, his hands moving with practiced gentleness. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, kneeling just a few feet away. "We're here now. You're not alone anymore." The puppy flinched, ever so slightly at the sound of the voice, but didn't attempt to move or retreat. His eyes locked onto Dana's, and for a single heartbreaking moment, she thought she saw something flicker in them, something fragile and barely breathing, the last dying ember of trust. She reached out slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, and gently stroked the matted fur on his back. The puppy's muscles tensed at first, but then he relaxed, his head drooping against the ground as if surrendering, not out of relief but out of sheer exhaustion. Dana felt her throat tighten. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, even though she knew the puppy couldn't answer. Marcus worked quickly to remove the chain. It had bitten into the skin of the puppy's neck, leaving a raw red groove that would take time to heal. When the collar finally clinked to the ground and the puppy felt the absence of its weight for the first time in who knew how long, he blinked slowly, dazed. Marcus scooped him up with tender care, and the puppy, so light, so still, did not resist. His body was limp, and it terrified Dana how easy he was to carry. "Let's get him in the truck," she said, her voice hardening with resolve. "We need to get him to the clinic. Now." As they drove away, Dana kept glancing into the back seat where the puppy lay on a pile of blankets, barely breathing. He didn't whine. He didn't cry. It was like all sound had been drained from him. He simply watched, eyes open, alert yet detached, like a soul suspended somewhere between life and surrender. Dana reached back and gently stroked his paw, tears silently slipping down her cheeks. She had rescued dozens of animals, each story its own tragedy, each animal its own miracle. But there was something about this puppy that shattered her more deeply than usual. Maybe it was how he didn't fight, how he didn't try to escape, how he didn't seem surprised by either cruelty or kindness, as if he had already accepted both as inevitable facts of life. They didn't have a name for him yet, but Dana was already thinking of one. She didn't say it aloud. Names were a promise, and she'd learned to wait until she was sure they could keep that promise. At the clinic, the staff sprang into motion the second Dana walked through the door. The puppy was examined, cleaned, treated for dehydration, and given a soft bed with warm blankets. He slept for hours, not stirring once, as if his body had finally given itself permission to rest. Dana sat beside his kennel the whole time, watching over him like a mother who'd just found her lost child. When he finally opened his eyes again, she smiled, whispering, "You're safe now. We found you, and we're not letting go." Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds. Light poured in through the windows, soft and golden, falling gently across the sleeping puppy like a blessing. The chains were gone. The silence was lifting. And for the first time since his tiny paws had stepped into this world, hope, quiet, fragile, beautiful, began to stir. The morning after his rescue, the puppy lay still in his soft kennel bed, wrapped in a warm flannel blanket that smelled of lavender detergent and something even more unfamiliar: safety. The faint hum of the clinic was a gentle white noise around him. The low murmur of voices, the distant bark of another dog, the soft tapping of keyboards. He didn't flinch, he didn't tremble, but he also didn't move. His eyes blinked open slowly, uncertainly, as though he were waking from a dream. He wasn't sure he wanted to leave. For a long time, he simply lay there, breathing in the strange air, his tiny chest rising and falling in cautious rhythm. Trust was still a foreign language to him. The world had taught him that movement invited punishment, sound brought pain, and people were unpredictable forces capable of either cruelty or indifference. And yet something in the softness of this place, its light, its warmth, the kind eyes that greeted him, was chipping away at the walls he had built to survive. Dana had returned early. She sat cross-legged in front of his kennel, her clipboard forgotten beside her. She didn't speak at first. She just sat there patient and still, like a lighthouse waiting for a ship lost in fog. Her presence wasn't intrusive, it was an offering. The puppy lifted his head an inch and watched her. His eyes weren't dead, not anymore, just cautious. She noticed and gave the smallest smile. "Good morning, sweet boy," she whispered. "You're still with us, that's good." He studied her face, unsure of what to do with the gentle tone, the lack of urgency. She reached into the kennel slowly and laid a hand on the blanket near his paw, not touching him, just letting her warmth spread. "We're going to take this one breath at a time," she said, more to herself than to him. "You don't have to do anything today, just be." And so he did. For the rest of the morning, he stayed curled in his spot, occasionally glancing at Dana or one of the vet techs who passed by, each time expecting something harsh, something loud. But nothing came. Only kindness. Only care. It was disorienting, like stepping into a story where the rules had changed. By afternoon, he had eaten a little. Just a few bites of the soft, fragrant food placed at the edge of his bed. He didn't devour it like he was starving, though he surely was, but rather he nibbled carefully, watching the door as if expecting someone to yank the bowl away. No one did. Dana noticed. "Progress," she whispered with a small smile. Every movement he made, no matter how slight, was a victory. Lifting his head, shifting his paws, letting a sigh escape without fear. The clinic staff noticed too. They didn't crowd him or try to coax affection. They gave him space, gentleness, and patience, the very things he'd never known he needed. They named him Chance. It felt fitting. He was, after all, a second chance in a fur-covered form. But Dana knew better than to rush that name onto him. It had to be earned, not by him, but by the world around him. It had to show him he was safe before he could wear a name like a badge of hope. Still, it helped to speak to him with love. "Hey, Chance," she would say softly as she entered the room. "Look at you being brave." Each day brought small changes. On the third day, he stood up fully for the first time and walked a few tentative steps to the front of the kennel. His legs wobbled and his movements were slow, but his eyes were curious. On the fourth day, he accepted a treat from Dana's hand, not eagerly, but without flinching. On the fifth, he let a vet tech stroke his back while he drank water, the first contact he hadn't immediately pulled away from. Dana kept a journal of his milestones, scribbling them like sacred scripture. Day 1, eyes tracked movement. Day 3, walked. Day 5, accepted touch. It wasn't just his body healing. His spirit, though fragile, was mending. The clinic dog in the neighboring kennel, a jovial terrier named Max, barked cheerfully at everyone who passed. At first, Chance ignored him, too overwhelmed by his own stillness. But one morning, as Max wagged his tail and pressed his nose through the bars, Chance tilted his head. Just a little. Dana saw it and felt tears sting her eyes. "You're noticing," she whispered. "You're starting to care." Outside the clinic, plans were forming. Dana had already contacted a foster network she trusted deeply. She knew he couldn't stay in the clinic forever. He needed a home environment, a quiet place where he could learn to trust without the noise of machines and the shuffle of endless feet. But it had to be the right home. Someone patient, someone gentle, someone who understood that love wasn't always loud, and that progress could be measured in silence. As the week ended, Dana sat beside his kennel one evening, her heart full of both gratitude and sadness. She knew that fostering was the next step, that it was the right move, but the thought of letting him go even temporarily felt like handing over a piece of her own heart. She leaned her forehead against the bars, whispering softly, "You're going to be okay. I promise." Inside the kennel, Chance lifted his head and, for the first time, took a step toward her without fear. He pressed his tiny nose against the bars, and Dana smiled through tears. She reached forward and let her fingers rest gently against his. It was the quietest of moments, but it thundered through her like a promise fulfilled. In that small act, he wasn't just learning to trust, he was learning to live. And for the first time since the day he was found, the chains he once wore didn't feel like part of him anymore. They were just a memory, fading, breaking, gone. At first, the puppy, now called Benny, lived like a shadow inside the rescue center. His world had shifted, yes. The chains were gone. The cold concrete had been replaced by soft blankets, and hunger was no longer a constant ache gnawing at his belly. But even without visible suffering, his mind remained shackled to fear. He didn't bark. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't rush to greet anyone who passed by his kennel. When volunteers offered treats through the mesh, Benny wouldn't move. He would just stare, unmoving, as if he didn't understand what kindness was or how to accept it. The food would remain untouched until they walked away, and only then, cautiously, quietly, he would inch toward it and eat, eyes always flicking toward the door. The staff tried to be patient. Dana came every morning and sat near his space, reading aloud or softly humming, just so her presence became familiar. Still, he kept a distance, a quiet watcher in a world where trust was a language he had never learned. He flinched at loud noises. Sudden movements made him tremble. Other dogs barked and played in the yard beyond, but Benny stayed curled in the farthest corner of his kennel, tail tucked beneath him like a creature too broken to know the sky was no longer falling. Dana tried to convince herself that time would fix it. "He just needs time," she told Marcus one evening, as they watched Benny sit by the window, eyes distant, as if he was somewhere else entirely. Marcus frowned. "Maybe. Or maybe he needs something we can't give him here." Dana looked at him. "Like what?" "A home," Marcus said, then added, "A real one. One where he's the only focus, where someone has the time to break through." Dana nodded, but her heart sank. Benny wasn't ready for adoption. Not yet. No one would want a dog who didn't play, didn't cuddle, didn't respond. He didn't even know what a leash was, let alone how to walk on one. If she rushed him out into a new home too early, it could set him back even further. And yet, she feared he was fading here. He was safe, yes, but safety wasn't the same as healing. Safety was a cage without pain. Healing meant learning to live again. Benny hadn't learned that yet. But Dana refused to give up on him. One rainy Thursday, everything changed. A 12-year-old girl named Lily came in with her father to volunteer after school. She was quiet, thoughtful, and unusually gentle for her age. Her father explained that she'd been through a lot in the past year. Her mother had passed away unexpectedly, and since then, Lily had withdrawn from nearly everything she once loved. Therapy hadn't helped much. Animals, however, seemed to hold her attention, which was why she'd asked to spend time at the rescue. Dana welcomed them with warmth, though she couldn't help but worry that the shelter might be too much for Lily's tender heart. That concern faded the moment she watched Lily walk past rows of kennels and stop outside Benny's. She didn't speak. She didn't call to him or stick her hand through the bars like most visitors did. She just sat down cross-legged in front of his kennel and looked at him with wide, understanding eyes. Benny watched her, not suspiciously, just watching, curious. For 15 full minutes, they did nothing but stare at one another in silence, and then Lily smiled, a soft, small smile that didn't demand anything. It simply existed, like a candle in the dark. Dana saw it from across the room and felt something stir in her chest. The next day, Lily came again. She sat outside Benny's kennel for half an hour, still silent, still smiling. She brought a book and read aloud in a whisper. Benny didn't come closer, but he didn't retreat either. On the third day, she brought a worn, stuffed bunny and left it at the edge of the kennel. Benny sniffed it cautiously when she left. On the fourth day, he moved 2 inches closer. On the fifth, his nose touched her outstretched hand. It was the first time he had reached toward someone. Dana cried that night. Lily returned every afternoon for the next 2 weeks, and each time Benny gave her a little more, an inch of movement, a tilt of the head, a wag of his tail so subtle, it could have been a breath. One day he licked her fingers. Another, he stood up when he saw her coming. Dana watched in awe as the invisible wall Benny had lived behind began to crumble, not because someone had kicked it down, but because a child had sat patiently in front of it and waited for him to peek over. Lily had never asked Benny for anything. She hadn't coaxed or commanded. She'd simply been there quietly, lovingly, unfailingly, the way only someone who knew what it was like to be deeply hurt could be. By the end of the month, Benny was allowing himself to be leashed, only by Lily, and would walk with her slowly around the backyard. It wasn't perfect. He was still frightened of loud noises. He still cowered if a door slammed. But now he would lift his ears when he heard Lily's voice. He would rest his chin on her lap when she sat down beside him. And once, Dana swore, she saw him smile. A real gentle smile that reached his tired eyes. And then came the moment Dana had dreaded and hoped for all at once. Lily's father asked if they could adopt Benny. He said it carefully, respectfully, understanding how much work had gone into helping the pup open up. "I think they need each other," he said. "They've both been through something heavy, and somehow they're helping each other carry it." Dana didn't answer right away. She stared at Benny, now resting peacefully on Lily's feet. His breathing slow, his eyes half closed in that way dogs do when they feel safe. She thought about the first time she saw him, chained and silent behind that abandoned house, and now here he was, willing to rest, to trust, to lean into the warmth of a human. She thought about Lily too, how she'd never asked to be saved, and yet somehow found healing by giving it to someone else. Maybe this wasn't about who was saving whom. Maybe it never had been. "Yes," Dana finally said. "Yes, I think they're ready." Benny's first night in Lily's home was quiet, but not in the peaceful way most people imagine. It was the kind of quiet that clung to the corners, that hovered above the furniture like dust that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. But my house itself was neat. Warm-toned walls, bookshelves full of picture books and memories, a half-used art set on the kitchen table. But there was a stillness in it, the sort that only comes when grief has settled in and made itself comfortable. It wasn't that there was no love here, quite the opposite. There was too much of it, really. So much that it spilled into the silence and made the absence of Lily's mother feel like an open wound stitched into the walls. Lily's father greeted Benny with the same gentle calm he had shown at the shelter, letting the dog sniff his shoes, his hands, his voice. He didn't crowd him. He didn't force interaction. He simply said, "Welcome home, Benny," and walked into the kitchen to give him space. Lily had spent all afternoon preparing for this. She'd placed the stuffed bunny he liked on his new bed near the window, set out 2 bowls with fresh food and water, and taped a drawing above his crate that read, "Benny's safe spot." The drawing was simple, just a stick figure girl and a brown dog under a blue sky, but it made her dad tear up when he saw it. Benny approached it all with the caution of a creature used to disappointment. He sniffed the crate, took 1 step, and then quickly backed out again. He tested the water bowl, then walked away. When Lily sat down on the floor, he slowly curled beside her, his body not touching hers, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. She didn't speak. She simply leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. That night she fell asleep on the floor beside his bed. When her father came in to carry her to her room, he noticed Benny had moved closer, his head resting near her small hand, eyes half closed, but not asleep, just watching, just breathing. The first few days were filled with small miracles. Benny ate his meals. He followed Lily from room to room, cautious but curious. He began wagging his tail, first slowly, then with more ease when he saw her each morning. He barked for the first time on the 4th day when the mailman approached the porch, and the sound startled him so much he immediately ran and hid behind the couch. Lily didn't laugh. She simply crawled beside the couch and whispered, "It's okay, you were just being brave." Slowly, he inched forward again. Lily started to teach him how to sit, how to lie down, how to walk on a leash without fear tugging at his every step. There were good days, and then there were hard ones. One Saturday, a thunderstorm rolled in. The first crack of lightning was enough to send Benny trembling under the kitchen table, his entire body shaking like a leaf in wind. His pupils widened, his breathing turned shallow and fast. Lily, who had been painting at the time, dropped her brush and immediately ran to him. She didn't try to drag him out. She didn't offer him treats or toys. She crawled under the table with him, just like she had at the shelter. "It's just thunder," she whispered. "It's loud, I know. But you're not outside anymore. There are no chains here, just me and you." She stayed there for over an hour, rubbing his back gently, letting him shake until the storm passed. Her father walked in at one point, holding a blanket and a flashlight, and just stood watching them for a while. His daughter crouched in the dark, comforting a dog whose scars went far beyond his skin. He didn't say anything. He just placed the blanket over both of them and quietly walked away. Benny's world was expanding in tiny, beautiful ways. He began sniffing at the toys in the living room. One morning, Lily's father caught him curled up in the laundry basket, napping on top of one of her old sweatshirts. He even began wagging his tail when her father entered the room, and once he let him scratch behind his ears. It was slow, fragile progress, but it was real. Healing didn't come in grand gestures or big breakthroughs. It came in soft mornings, in quiet companionship, in the way Benny would lean his head into Lily's chest as she read aloud by the window. It came in the way his tail thumped lazily against the floor whenever she walked into the room. It came in how he no longer flinched at every noise, no longer stared at the door like he was waiting to be left behind again. Still, the shadows never fully disappeared. Benny had nightmares. Some nights he would yelp in his sleep, legs twitching, breath rapid as if reliving a past he could never describe. Lily would wake instantly, crawling out of bed to sit beside him, whispering stories and stroking his fur until the tension melted from his body. And when she had her own nightmares, when the grief of missing her mom crept in uninvited, Benny would curl against her like armor. He didn't know what death meant, didn't understand the weight of losing a parent, but he knew pain. He knew what it meant to feel alone in a world that didn't seem to notice. And in those quiet hours of shared ache, they found comfort not in words, but in presence. One sunny afternoon, Lily and Benny sat in the backyard watching butterflies flicker around the garden. The air was warm, and Benny was sprawled out on the grass, belly exposed to the sun, tongue lolling to the side in a way that made Lily laugh for the first time in months. She looked at him with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by how much he had changed, and how much he had changed her. "I think you saved me too," she whispered. Benny looked at her, tilted his head, and then did something he'd never done before. He placed a paw on her lap and leaned his head against her chest. It was small, but it was everything. And inside the house, her father stood at the kitchen window watching them. His daughter, once shattered by grief, was healing piece by piece, not through therapy or words, but through love. And that dog, once left to die in chains behind an abandoned house, was now basking in sunlight with a girl who needed him just as much as he needed her. It was imperfect, it was messy, but it was home. And sometimes, that was more than enough. It had been nearly a year since Benny's first day in Lily's home, and in many ways it felt like the start of a new life for both of them. The house that had once felt too quiet, too heavy with sorrow, was now filled with laughter, movement, and the soft patter of paws on hardwood floors. Lily's father often joked that the house was now alive in a way it hadn't been since his wife passed away. But he wasn't speaking about the decorations or the furniture. He was talking about Benny, the dog who had been an unexpected gift, a bond that healed deeper than anyone could have imagined. Benny had changed in ways no one thought possible that first week at the shelter. His coat had grown shinier and fuller, his eyes sparkled with curiosity, and he no longer flinched at every sound. But it wasn't just his outward transformation that touched the heart. It was the way he had learned to trust again. And more than that, the way he had learned to love. It wasn't perfect love. It was a love born out of necessity and time. A love that had grown like a vine, winding through the cracks and scars in his soul, reaching out toward Lily, toward her father, and finally, toward the world. Lily often sat beside him in the evenings, her back against the couch, sketching in her notebook, while Benny rested his head on her lap. She didn't always talk. Sometimes she would simply hum a song her mother had taught her when she was younger. It was a song about hope, about the strength to keep moving forward even when the road seemed endless. And Benny, always attentive, would nuzzle her hand gently, as if he could understand the weight of the words she didn't speak. In many ways, she had taught him how to be loved. In turn, he had taught her how to heal. She knew now that love wasn't something that could be fixed. It didn't require perfection. It simply needed the courage to keep showing up day after day, even when it hurt. One day, Lily stood by the window watching Benny play in the backyard. The sun was warm on her face and the air smelled sweet with the scent of blooming flowers. Benny was chasing after a ball, his tail wagging furiously as he raced across the grass, stopping every so often to glance back at her, waiting for the next throw. The scene was ordinary in every way. A dog, a girl, a game. But in that moment, Lily realized just how extraordinary it was. A year ago, Benny hadn't even known what it meant to play. A year ago, he had been chained behind an abandoned house, isolated and alone. And now he was running freely, trusting the world again, and trusting her. Lily's father came into the room, holding a small box. He paused beside her, looking out at the backyard where Benny was frolicking with the same enthusiasm as any other dog. "He's come a long way," her father said, his voice soft with emotion. Lily nodded, her throat tight with the same quiet gratitude she had carried for so long. "Yeah," she whispered. "He really has." Her father handed her the small box, the one he had been holding. "I think it's time for a new chapter, don't you?" he asked. Lily opened the box, and inside was a collar, a beautiful leather one with a silver tag attached. She read the tag aloud, her voice breaking with emotion. "Benny, forever. Loved." Her father placed the collar in her hands and smiled, a smile full of warmth and pride. "It's yours if you want it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily's heart swelled, and tears welled in her eyes as she turned toward the window once more, her gaze falling on Benny, who had now slowed down, lying contentedly in the grass, his eyes soft as they met hers. She walked outside slowly, the collar in her hands, her steps light but filled with the weight of everything Benny had been through. As she approached him, he lifted his head, his eyes bright and calm. Lily knelt down beside him, and for a long moment, the two of them simply looked at one another as if they were sharing an unspoken understanding of how far they had both come. She gently placed the collar around his neck, fastening it with care. Benny didn't pull away. He didn't flinch or recoil. He simply sat there patiently, as if he knew, as if he understood. For the first time, he looked up at her with the kind of trust that only comes from knowing, deep in your bones, that you are home. "Forever loved," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "You're home now, Benny." And in that moment, it felt like the world shifted, like a long, aching breath had been taken and held only to be released, and everything felt lighter, freer. Benny's tail gave a slow wag, and he nudged Lily's hand with his nose as if to say, "Thank you." It was the first time she'd ever seen him truly at peace. His entire body relaxed, no longer on alert, no longer trapped by the shadows of his past. He was a dog who had found his place in the world, a dog who had found his home. The days that followed were filled with joy. Benny became a part of the rhythm of life in Lily's home. They walked together in the mornings, played together in the afternoons, and in the evenings they curled up on the couch as a family, a silent understanding between them, no words needed. Their bond was no longer fragile, no longer based on fear or survival. It was rooted in love, deep and true. Lily's father often watched them, his eyes glistening with pride. "You did it, kid," he would say softly. "You both did." Benny had been rescued from an unimaginable past. He had been given a second chance, not only by the people who saved him, but by Lily, the girl who had patiently sat beside him, offering nothing but her quiet presence, and in doing so, had given him the gift of trust. Together they had built a home not out of walls or furniture, but out of love, healing, and time. And as Lily sat with Benny on the porch, watching the sunset, she felt a warmth spread through her chest, a quiet kind of happiness that filled the empty spaces inside her. There would always be days when the past haunted her, when she missed her mother more than she could bear. But in Benny, she had found the courage to keep moving forward. She had found the strength to heal, and for that she would forever be grateful.